Hi, I'm Karin Zissa-Cevallos, COA Online. On March 7th, U.S. President Joe Biden delivered his annual State of the Union speech. But what about the state of the Americas?
Now to the chaos happening in Haiti. Gangs launching a violent assault on the presidential palace overnight. The Caribbean...
El que lo ha violado del principio a fin ha sido precisamente el régimen de Maduro.
Campaigns are at full throttle across Latin America ahead of presidential elections in 2024.
Hours before the president's remarks, ASCOA hosted an event with the State Department's top diplomat for Latin America, Brian Nichols. In a conversation with our Vice President, Eric Farnsworth, the Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs laid out Washington's stance on various regional issues. Most pressingly, he spoke about Haiti's political crisis.
We've got to do more urgently. The crisis in Haiti has the humanitarian proportions that demand a global response, the way the international community is responding to the challenges in Ukraine or in Gaza.
The Assistant Secretary also delved into the latest on Venezuela. In November, Washington dialed back some sanctions on the Maduro regime in an effort to promote democratic elections this year. But the Venezuelan government then banned top opposition candidate María Corina Machado from running.
So I think we have to be very clear that the incentives that we and I think others in the international community have put on the table to move toward a competitive election in Venezuela have not been sufficient to motivate reforms and openness that the Maduro side believes would put their administration at risk.
Nichols also talked about democracy challenges across the hemisphere, how Mexico's election could impact the bilateral relationship, and regional unity. Thank you for being with us. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Latin American Focus at Apple, Spotify, or your platform of choice.
You're listening to Latin America in Focus.
Latinoamérica en Foco.
América Latina em Foco.
A podcast by America Society, Council of the Americas on politics, economics, and culture in the region.
Brian, thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for keeping this appointment. It's a really busy time. Let's start with what's on the minds of a lot of people, not necessarily Latin America watchers, but tonight the president offers remarks on the State of the Union. If he were to give remarks on the state of the Americas, what do you think he might say?
I think the heart of our region is that we have incredible partnerships. And whether Canada, Mexico, Brazil, the renewed partnership with Argentina, and we had a great visit down there, our credible relations with countries in the Caribbean, working together, really shoulder to shoulder to deal with the crisis in Haiti, dealing with the democratic challenges in Nicaragua and in Venezuela. This really is a hemisphere of partnership, and that makes a big, big difference. When you look at all of the trouble around the world, we have our share in our region, but I think we have a shared set of values and a shared approach and a shared commitment that no region in the world can match.
Based on that, you just came from a meeting with the Secretary on Haiti. Several questions that we took in advance of this session did focus on Haiti. What's next? You obviously have latest developments. If you want to make news, by the way, now's the time to do it on Haiti. But having said that, one of the things that you alluded to in your remarks was the need for international cooperation, collaboration. You called out Canada, you've got the Kenya initiative, et cetera. And I guess the question is, what can the international community do together on Haiti? It's such a complicated scenario. The United States, we've got so many other things going on. How do you organize that coalition to make a meaningful difference in a country that is desperate for some sort of peaceful resolution to what really is a crisis?
Well, I think there are a number of things. We and key partners are working to provide urgent assistance to the Haitian National Police to deal with the critical problem of gang violence that's happening right now. The broader challenge is forging an inclusive government that can take the country to elections. And Secretary Blinken has led those efforts. He's, 2 years ago, he was talking to Prime Minister Ariel Henry about the need for a more inclusive government that includes many more political forces and has the breadth to take the country through the electoral period. We've continued to stress that and to support Haitian stakeholders in coming together and trying to negotiate a way forward. I was honored to be with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield in Guyana, where we reinforced those conversations and worked really shoulder to shoulder with our host, President Ali, Prime Minister Motley, and the range of CARICOM leaders on these issues. And CARICOM has been working tirelessly since then to try and forge and support a consensus among Haitians going forward. Secretary Blinken spoke with President Ali and with Prime Minister Henry about the urgent need to accelerate transition to a broader, more inclusive government today. And those were intensive conversations. I told you that I thought I would be here significantly earlier than I actually arrived. And that's because it was repeated calls, really thoughtful, deep conversations trying to move things forward. And we're deeply grateful to our partners in CARICOM in particular for their tireless efforts.
And while we're on the topic, what could be a solution to help address some of the deteriorating security scenario, right? Because the Haitian people are the ones who ultimately pay the price. You personally and the State Department, you've been in some really productive and effective discussions, I believe, in terms of Kenya and all that, but you really do have a deteriorating situation on the ground. They need help now. How do you address that?
Well, first step, trying to provide additional equipment to the Haitian National Police, working to reinforce the resources that Haiti's government has to address this challenge, but more broadly, speeding the deployment of a multinational security support mission to Haiti. That is crucial. And that means making sure that the contributions in terms of financing, logistics, mobility, personnel are all in place. And I think the meeting that the Secretary co-chaired in Rio on the margins of the G20 helped advance that. In addition to Canada's generous financial pledge, Benin offered as many as 2,000 peacekeepers themselves, where there are already pledges from a number of countries in the Caribbean, as well as expressions of interest depending on what the additional needs are from other countries in Latin America and in Africa, as well as financial pledges from Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. All of that needs to be accelerated. The efforts that have been made thus far are vital and important, and we've been proud to be the largest donor to the effort, but we've got to do more. We've got to do more urgently. The crisis in Haiti has the humanitarian proportions that demand a global response, the way the international community is responding to the challenges in Ukraine or in Gaza.
It's a really interesting point, and I haven't heard it put quite that way, but I think that's an effective framing of what truly is a much bigger issue than, quote unquote, just a national issue. No, it clearly has broader implications. Look, I mean, democracy's promotion is never easy. We've been in this game, you in official, government, me sort of outside, and others in this room, using all the tools available over time to try to promote democracy, but it's never easy. It seems to have gotten more difficult in recent years. Outside actors, you alluded to some, you mentioned some in your remarks. Does the United States, because I think we all would agree that promotion of democracy is in the U.S. interest, would we agree that the U.S. has the appropriate tools at this stage in history to be able to do that effectively? I mean, it's a genuine question. I mean, because the threats evolve. Have our tools kept up with our ability to address some of these real challenges? And you mentioned Ecuador, you mentioned Guatemala, Brazil. It's really an interesting time.
the Biden and Harris administration has really tried to focus on new tools, things like expanding access to the internet, to mobile education, new job opportunities to help the economies grow from the bottom up and from the middle out has been a priority for this administration. And you saw that highlighted in the pillars of the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And you're one of the founders of the Summit of the Americas process. So I think seeing that continue to be leveraged and then built on through the OAS General Assembly and the OAS process, America's partnership, all of those things are important economic and political tools. But the resources that we bring to bear to address these challenges, this is a difficult moment, and we're asking the American people and the U.S. Congress to provide ample resources to address these challenges. I was really struck by the conversation between President Biden and President Lula when they first met. That was not their first meeting, their first Oval Office meeting. Their shared experiences on January 6th and January 8th in the respective countries and the threats to democracy that even large established democracies face means that we all have to be vigilant together. This is not a process where the United States can just deliver stone tablets on high, but this is a process where we all have to work together, and we face threats just like other countries face threats to democracy, and we have to work together. And the collaboration that we've seen, I think, in rebuilding the regional and international consensus around the importance of a democratic path forward in Venezuela, for example, where now it's very clear that the Maduro side is failing to deliver on the commitments that it made in the Barbados Agreement, permitting the opposition to choose its own candidate, harassment of Vente Venezuela campaign workers, arrest of at least 37 people since then. Those are all clear signs, and we see a much more solid regional and global response to that, I would argue, than we would have a few years back. So I think that's a major example. In my remarks, I talked about Guatemala and in Ecuador, about how we've worked with other partners to try and support democracy in those countries. And we're going to continue to do that regardless of where governments lie in the ideological spectrum, but really focus on, did you come to power democratically, and are you governing democratically?
Because you mentioned Venezuela, let's stay with that for just a minute. And it's so important in the overall scheme of the broader hemispheric agenda. There have been some developments over the last week. You have a date now set for elections. We have upcoming in April the deadline in terms of the sanctions snapback or not. That's a decision the administration will have to take. We also have the continued disqualification of the candidate of the opposition that was chosen freely in a primaries process. So it's a really impossibly difficult situation. So let me ask you, what do we do from here? Where do you go from here? I mean, you have just a few months for the opposition really to organize elections that I think, these are my words, not yours, but not going to be free and fair, but based on current provisions. How do we advance the cause of democracy effectively in the current scenario? Barbados is not compelling the Maduro administration or Maduro regime to take any meaningful steps at all.
So I think we have to be very clear that the incentives that we and I think others in the international community have put on the table to move toward a competitive election in Venezuela have not been sufficient to motivate reforms and openness that the Maduro side believes would put their administration at risk. And when you see the number of votes that María Corina Machado received in the opposition primary versus the number of votes that the 5 items received in the Essequibo referendum, I think that sent a chilling message to the Maduro side. I think the polls that I think many of the people who are here with us or online have seen make it clear that there's a hunger for change in Venezuela. And Venezuelans should have the opportunity to exercise their free will and suffrage. It's on the democratically inclined parties in Venezuela to come together around a way forward. I firmly believe that when we're dealing with partners around the region, the people in those countries should be the ones who are setting their own fate and determining things. And our role is to support them in that effort. So we'll be taking our cues from the democratic opposition in Venezuela about the way forward. While the clock is, well, maybe I shouldn't characterize what you said, but the timelines are tight. We don't want to prejudge how things will turn out, but the direction of travel is deeply worrisome. And we look to working with democratic actors in Venezuela and our partners around the region to determine, well, how do we respond to a country that is not respecting the democratic norms that we all hold dear? And whether you're in Colombia or Brazil or Guyana or Suriname or, I'll just rattle off all the other countries in South America or in the Caribbean, all of the leaders of those places stand for elections. They have international observers. They have a transparent process, and people get to pick. So I think that the leaders of those nations should continue to deliver the message that the Venezuelan people deserve the same opportunity to make a choice, and that a true leader stands for election and respects the decision of the people.
I think that's a really important and powerful point that you just made. In fact, that was going to be my follow-up question. Do you sense in other Democrats around the region the level of support and engagement that would be helpful to the extent possible? Again, this is on the ground in Venezuela. There's only so much influence people from the outside can exercise, but that is helping to drive toward as much of a positive outcome as possible. And the message you just delivered, I think, is very positive and frankly very helpful, I think, in the current moment. Let's change course a little bit from specific countries to, again, tools of engagement. You mentioned in your remarks, which we appreciated very much, you raised the economic agenda. Council of the Americas is an economic and trade and financial group, think tank, but also trade association. These issues are very close to our heart. We joke sometimes that trade isn't the most popular topic to discuss in Washington, et cetera. We get that. But at the same time, if you take economics and trade engagement off the table, that's a powerful tool that oftentimes can't be replicated through other means. And so I guess the question would be, in the current environment, you mentioned the president's engagement at the Summit of the Americas, the APEP. We have an election year now. What could we usefully be engaging in today in terms of economic engagement in the region to help drive those positive results that will help support democracy, will reduce the urge to migrate, will do all the things that I think we all want in a favorable and appropriate way? The Senate and the Congress just released yesterday the Americas Act. That's another approach. I mean, how can we be moving forward together in real economic partnership with the region, which is what we hear all the time from interlocutors? That's what what folks really are looking for.
So there are a lot of things. One of the things that really struck me about our trip to Argentina, I was there twice in 2 weeks. Argentina is a country that has so much potential and so many possibilities that haven't been fully realized. And the conversation that we had with President Milei, his willingness to really reach out and strengthen the economic relationship and partnership with the United States, I think, is incredibly welcome. And he's got a cabinet full of economists. So it's a fascinating meeting for an economics major.
Too many jokes come to the fore, but anyway.
But critical minerals, for example, is an unexploited opportunity in Argentina. And when you look at the potential production for critical minerals and how that can integrate into North American supply chains and the opportunities that are there, that really struck us as something that we need to deepen. And more broadly, renewable energy. We're going to have a renewable energy dialogue with Argentina and put that into a broader context. Obviously, Argentina also has significant shall we say, traditional energy reserves that could be better taken advantage of as we migrate to renewables. And then you look at the work in a country like Chile, where there are many of the same resources, but they're significantly ahead in the exploitation of those resources. That's another great partnership in our region. as we look at the challenges in Central America around providing people good opportunities and reasons to stay at home, there are things that we can do to promote better jobs and trade and non-tariff related investments and advantages in Central America. Guatemala has tremendous potential, and Central America Forward and the Partnership for Central America have really represented great ways to increase investment, and President Areva's focus now on not just having that general investment in Guatemala, but directing that investment to communities and areas that have traditionally been left behind, and as a result have generated outward migration, and we think that's a great idea. The opportunities in Costa Rica, I mean, Costa Rica is really operating at a sort of a significant technological advantage to many other countries in the region, whether it's pharmaceuticals or semiconductors. They're doing things that others aren't doing, certainly in Central America, and that's an opportunity to link them up with us. We have complementary business opportunities there. And the one that is huge and we often forget, though we shouldn't when we're talking about our region, is Canada. Canada is an incredible partner for the United States at every single level, and the commerce and trade between our two nations is enormous. Many, many Canadian and U.S. companies have branches on the other side of the border, and we have a lot of opportunities with Canada. And we also have some fence mending issues that we have to resolve with Canada, and we want to do that going forward as partners and friends as we jointly take on challenges within our region and around the world. They're a key partner, obviously, in Ukraine, for example, or in the Pacific.
Absolutely. We don't have a whole lot of time remaining. We have probably about 10 minutes, and we had some questions that we can take now. Let's stay with the economic side for just a minute, but put it in a slightly different context. You mentioned China, and you talked about the influence in terms of democracy and authoritarian governance, et cetera, and the U.S. desire and willingness and ability to compete. Let's put it in the economic environment in terms of supply chains and the attractiveness of Latin America and the Caribbean as investment destinations. So coming out of the pandemic, there was a whole lot of attention on supply chain resiliency, and there was, I guess, just an assumption folks would move out of China, because that's where lots of the PPE and other things were sourced from, to come to the Western Hemisphere. We've seen some of that. In my view, we should see more of it. And I guess the question is, what are some things that we can be doing, should be doing? The Secretary of Commerce, for example, will be in Costa Rica in a couple of weeks on the supply chains, but also the computer chips issue. I mean, that's huge. That a country in Central America is being seen in that way, and potentially a partner in North American trade, USMCA, et cetera. I mean, this is really a big deal. Are there other things that we can be doing in that context that you see from your State Department perspective?
Well, the U.S. is the largest source of foreign direct investment in Brazil and Argentina, many other countries in the region. And the difference between our economic relationship and China is that our investments and our business relationships generate high-paying quality jobs, and frankly, most of the economic relations that China is involved in terms of economic activity in the region, it is basic commodities, and they're not really improved, and they're not yielding high-paying jobs or transformation in those countries. So that's one thing that strikes me. But what more could we do? Certainly increase resources for Development Finance Corporation, for example, to help further seed investment and provide the resources that we need. I think they're doing some great work there, but we need to be more agile. Yeah. We need to deliver for our companies more quickly. We need to provide, the insurance that they need around investment, the credit. We need to make sure that, there may be a deal that's close, but there's a little bit of a risk. We shouldn't be afraid, as Secretary likes to say, we shouldn't be afraid to get caught trying. And I think we can do that more there. Leveraging the Inter-American Development Bank and IDB Invest is a great tool, and we've pledged to increase our contribution to IDB Invest. But more broadly, greater capitalization for the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, becoming a shareholder of the Caribbean Development Bank. Those are all ways that we could increase our presence in lending and economic opportunity in the region. The Summit of Small Island and Developing States is going to take place in the Caribbean this year in Antigua and Barbuda. That's an opportunity to enlist those who are at greatest risk for climate change and often get left behind in the global conversation, and engage them and think about what are new ways and new opportunities that we can provide financing, that we can mitigate the risks that they face from extreme weather events, which we know are much more expensive to rebuild after than they are to prevent. How do we address those challenges? I think those things are all crucial. And as we're doing through America's Partnership, really look at those non-tariff barriers to increase economic integration and dismantle those through things like customs harmonization, job training, labor market planning, those types of things.
Those aren't sexy topics, but they drive markets. Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah. And, we deal with the private sector. That's our primary constituency, and this is what they're always telling us. Right, fix some of these issues at the local level, the regulatory issue level, the infrastructure level, and you'd be surprised how much investment might materialize. One point that you mentioned, and also in your formal remarks in terms of DFC, I'm so glad you mentioned the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, bringing it together with what you mentioned in your remarks about the ability to engage with certain countries based on income levels. Mm-hmm. That's a fundamental point. It's an own goal that we drew the income levels at the wrong level so that we have to exclude much of Latin America and even some of the Caribbean. And that's an easy legislative fix, you would think. Congress? So that's something that certainly we would support, and if you can unlock some of those tools, and it's just because we didn't conceptualize it correctly. Well, we can fix that. So why aren't we? Brian, it's always the last question, and I think we're coming up to pretty close to our time. So I'm not going to ask the question exactly how it was written, but Mexico is going through an election right now, and the question would be, coming out of Mexico's elections, indeed coming out of the U.S. elections, because we have our own campaigns going on this year. What would you hope to see in the context of a bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Mexico under the next two presidents, whoever they are? We're not going to talk about individual candidates, but how do you get to where we want to be so that all of these partnerships and connectivity and happy things that we've been talking about, how do they actually transpire?
I think approaching the relationship and our shared border as an opportunity to be taken advantage of and not a problem to be solved is vital. We're talking about our largest economic partner on Earth.
Yes.
So this is bigger than China, bigger than Canada. So let's look at it like a tremendous opportunity on both sides of the border. Better jobs for Americans, better jobs for Mexicans, greater investment, but let's also focus on the challenges that we face. We've got to address irregular migration. And while Mexico is doing very well, Mexicans are still a big chunk of the people who arrive irregularly in the United States. So increasing economic opportunity and reasons to stay, and working with between the next, whoever the U.S. president is and whoever the Mexican president is, for those two people to work together and make sure that there are opportunities in the communities that send migrants from Mexico is important. Working together to address the hemispheric flow, where Mexico is the last stop before they arrive at the United States, is also vital. Mexico should be and is an incredible partner in renewable energy, manufacturing, climate change issues, addressing the environment, a whole host of issues. And working together on those is vital, and how Mexico feeds into the broader North American supply chain are issues. And then hopefully I'd like to see us work together even more closely to address the challenges we face throughout the hemisphere, whether it's democracy, whether it's migration, whether it's climate change, and on a global level. Mexico really is, continues to grow as a global power, and its wealth, its population are all sending a message, and this is an important opportunity for Mexican and U.S. leaders to work together bilaterally and then within the context of the North American Leaders Summit to deal with these global challenges in addition to the North American challenges that we face.
I think it's a fabulous message, and truthfully, bringing it back to kind of our own administration, you can't get, in my view, you can't get to a foreign policy for the middle class and not fundamentally include Mexico in that conversation. Because all those issues you just talked about affect the U.S. middle class, and everybody else for that matter, but the middle class. If I were a journalist, I would say, well, I've asked you a lot of questions, you've answered a lot, but what have I forgotten to ask you? What did you prepare that you want, the last message or the last thing that you want to say that I might not have asked you? Do you have a final word for us today?
Well, I would echo your comments at the top. There's no region that's more important for the United States than the Western Hemisphere. This is our home, and we've made great progress here. We still have tremendous challenges that we need to address. Internationally, this is a time of, I'm trying to think of when I've seen so much international tumult, and, we're now old enough to kind of remember that in the past, but like you haven't seen a land war in Europe or Middle East war at the same time. Challenges democracy in our hemisphere, and then the existential threat of climate change. We're dealing with a lot of really big issues on our plates, and we have to. One of the things that the president says that I really agree with is, we're the United States of America. When we work together, there is nothing that we can't do. And I would sort of put a corollary that with our partners in the Western Hemisphere, there's nothing that we can't do, and let's strengthen that partnership with our friends and allies in the Western Hemisphere.
Terrific concluding remarks, and I think you would not get any hint of disagreement from anybody in this audience, and I trust online as well. It was a great message. Brian, thank you for your time, your message today that you brought to us, but also thank you, frankly, for your leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Brian for his terrific comments today.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Karin Zissis. This episode was produced by John Orbach. Our executive producer is Luisa Lemmy. Check the podcast notes for a link to the video of this event. Access other episodes of Latin American Focus at www.as-coa.org/podcast and send us feedback at latamfocus@as-coa.org. Share and subscribe at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. The music in this episode is Arrecife Urbano, performed by Cuarteto de Guitarras de Costa Rica for America Society. Find out about upcoming concerts at musicoftheamericas.org. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of America Society, Council of the Americas, or its members.